You see this kid? He's pure evil. Today I'm going to show you how he went from John Julius Jacobson Jr., a child actor on the Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, to a female inmate on death row. But before I do, I need to warn you, this kid was sick, and there's two things that I'm going to cover that are really disturbing and pretty graphic. I'm going to recommend viewer discretion at this point. I'll warn you when those two parts are coming up, but I'm telling you, I'm not saying this for effect. This gets really twisted at the end. But before we do, if you're a fan of true crime, unsolved mysteries, just strange stuff in general, then you're at the right place. So if you like what you see, please give us a like and subscribe. Welcome to Project Strangeville. Since every villain needs a victim or victims, it's time you meet Tom Hawks. Tom was a Navy veteran, a probation officer, amateur bodybuilder, but most of all, he was a loving father to his two boys. When Tom was 39, he was at a neighborhood gathering in Newport Beach, California, and he's there with his two boys, and out of the corner of his eye, he catches a glimpse of this girl, and man, she really knocks him off his feet. And so he's kind of staring at her the entire time. She's looking over at him, and they exchange that awkward, glance where you catch each other and then you kind of look away. And so he finally works up some courage and goes and introduces himself to her. And it turns out it's 29-year-old Jackie. If there's such a thing as love at first sight, it really was for the two of them. And they were inseparable for the next 2 years. And finally, in 1989, they ended up getting married, and then Jackie moved in with Tom and his two boys. Jackie was a welcome ray of sunshine in the boys' lives and in Tom's lives. She had built such a tight relationship with the boys that even though their mother was still alive, the boys chose to call her mom. Family was really, really important to Jackie, and she loved those two boys as if they were her own. See, when Jackie was 22, she was in a really bad accident, and it caused a lot of internal damage, and because of that damage, she was no longer able to have kids of her own, but always wanted them. Now, even though Tom's boys weren't technically hers, she loved them as if they were. And years would pass, and as the boys were getting older, Tom, being a Navy veteran, he loved the water. So he would often spend a lot of time with the boys and with Jackie out on the water, renting sailboats or just going out on day cruises and coming back. Tom loved the idea of being at sea, and he often dreamt of someday selling the house and buying a boat and retiring out at sea, so much so that that's actually what Tom and Jackie had planned for. Now, they weren't rich and they didn't have a ton of cash laying around, but they knew if they were to cut some corners and sacrifice here and there a little bit, that with the proceeds from selling the house, plus what they could save, they could actually make this happen. Well, the day finally came where the boys were moving out, and although Tom and Jackie were sad to see him go, it was time for them to follow their dreams and sell the house, find a yacht, and retire out on the water. So Tom started scouring the local yacht magazines and looking for something that was affordable, maybe a little bit of a fixer-upper that they can put their own touches onto. And as luck would have it, Tom actually found a 55-foot yacht in Yachting World magazine. Now, it was no luxury yacht like the word yacht implies. However, it was nice, it was a good size, and it was seaworthy, and it was right in their budget. Now, Tom purchased the boat for $300,000 and named it the Well-Deserved, and rightly so. Now, Tom and Jackie, as you can imagine, they fell in love with that boat. Tom put some money into upgrading all the instrumentation on the boat, and Jackie did everything she could do on the inside to really make it a home. And after all that hard work, their dream was finally a reality. Now, for the next 2 years, they were having an absolute blast. They're doing day trips up and down the coast of California, going to Mexico, hanging out there for a little bit, going out with friends, taking friends out, taking the boys out, just enjoying life as it came, looking at sunsets, cocktails, the whole 9 yards. Until one day, Tom gets a phone call, and it turns out one of his sons is gonna have a baby. And Jackie is just over the moon with excitement. She couldn't have babies of her own, and Tom's kids were already grown. They were past the baby stage. So the idea of having the chance to hold a baby and her grandchild, she was just in love with the idea before the baby even got there. As soon as that baby was born, Tom and Jackie flew right out to go see that baby. Jackie got there and she was just eating it up, just holding on to the baby at all times, just loving every minute of it. Although they were living out their dreams on that boat, sometimes dreams can change, and this baby was everything to the two of them, and so was family. They were really, really big on family. So they decided we should probably sell the well-deserved. We can buy a house close by, and then we can all kind of be together again. Tom started to get their affairs in order, and he went ahead and he placed an ad in one of the yachting magazines, and he put the well-deserved up for sale for $435,000. And remember, he had put a lot of time and money into upgrading that boat. Now, it wouldn't take long before Tom got a phone call from this young couple that was interested in buying the well-deserved, and he was over the moon. He called his sons. He said, hey, I've got somebody interested in the boat. It's not going to be too long from now on, and I'll give you a buzz. I'll let you know what's going on, but we'll be there soon. Now, knowing that Tom and Jackie didn't have a lot of time left with the well-deserved, they decided to plan one more day trip with their friends. And here's actually a clip from that day.
Okay, here we are on Catalina Island. This is our last trip to the island because we sold the boat. And we're all having a really good time.
Now, shortly after, on November 15th, 2004, Tom and Jackie would meet the potential buyer to take the boat out on a sea trial. Sea trial is basically like a test drive, but for a boat. That would be the last time they were ever seen or heard from again. Now, about a week would go by, and nobody had heard from Tom or Jackie. The boys were starting to get really concerned. They were calling family, they were calling friends, but nobody had heard from Tom or Jackie, and that was really strange because Tom or Jackie would never go more than a couple of days without talking to one of the boys or somebody, and to not return a phone call was unbelievably uncharacteristic of the both of them. So they were growing really, really concerned. So the boys call their Uncle Jim. Their Uncle Jim is Tom's brother, and he's a retired police captain from a nearby town. So Jim grabs a buddy, and they decide to take a ride to Newport Beach and take a ride down to the marina and see if they could find Tom and Jackie. Jim's thinking, maybe something went wrong. The sale didn't go through. Maybe they're just out at sea and they've been just having a good time and just haven't come back to where they can get cell signal or get in touch with anybody. Either way, he figured he'd take a ride down, and if nothing more, he'd at least get a chance to say hi to his brother. So he makes his way to the marina, and Jim starts to head towards the well-deserved, and as he's walking up on the boat, he notices it's definitely the well-deserved. It's Tom's boat, but it doesn't look like Tom's boat. The moorings, which is basically where the rope is secured to the dock so the boat doesn't float away, the rope was really sloppy, and Tom would never do that, and a lot of the tarps were taken off of the equipment and just laying on the deck, and some other stuff on the deck, and there was a towel sticking out of like a porthole window. Just things that Tom would never do. He was meticulous about that boat. He loved every inch of that boat. He would never leave it in that shape. Jim's just kind of looking around, and there's nobody on board, and he's peeking around and can't really see anything, so he decides, he takes out a business card and he starts writing down, hey, I'm Jim Hawks. like to talk to you about my brother and my sister-in-law, Jackie. Please give me a call. And he leaves the card right on the boat. So he's looking around the area, still doesn't see Tom or Jackie, and all of a sudden he gets a phone call, and it's from this young girl, Jennifer, who says, hey, got your card off the boat. Me and my husband just bought the boat, and we're also looking for Tom and Jackie. She said she hadn't heard from them since they finalized the deal, and that she had found some of Jackie's items tucked away in a drawer that she thought Jackie would want, and that her husband had some questions on some of the equipment because he didn't know how to use it, and he wanted to ask Tom if there was an instruction manual or if maybe he could tell him how to use it. And Jim was really surprised by this, but he was grateful that she called, and he asked, did Tom or Jackie say where they might be headed? And Jennifer said, well, they did mention Mexico quite a bit. They said they had a son that just recently had a baby and that they were going to buy a house right over the border so they can come back and forth and visit with their grandchildren. Jim thanks Jennifer for calling and says, hey, if you should hear from them, please give me a call, let them know I'm looking for them. And Jennifer says, hey, same to you. If you should hear from them, please tell them I've got some of their items and so forth. We'd love to talk to them. I hope everything's okay. So this all seems really odd to Jim, but he knew if they were going to head to Mexico, that they would need to speak to a good friend of theirs named Patricia. Being that they were going to be out at sea quite a bit, they knew they weren't going to always have good cell signal or have access to the internet, and they had bills to pay and things of that nature. So Patricia was a good friend of theirs, so they had actually hired her to help keep track of the finances and pay bills and taxes and things of that nature for them. So Jim gets a hold of Patricia and he says, hey, looking for Tom and Jackie. I haven't talked to them. This is what's going on. Have they deposited a large sum of money in any one of their accounts recently? Like almost $500,000 worth. Patricia says, no, there's no way they deposited that kind of money. If they were going to, I would have known about it. Jim is convinced something is really, really off here. So he goes to the Newport Beach Police Department and he files a missing persons report. The police decide to start with the last people to see or speak to Tom and Jackie Hawks, Jennifer and her husband, Skylar Deleon. They immediately find out that Skylar's birth name is actually John Julius Jacobson Jr. A few years earlier, he had actually served time for armed robbery, and he's now on probation. He actually changes his name from John to Skylar not long after he left the military. So given his background, they're immediately suspicious of him. So they actually decide, let's just take a ride down the marina and see if we see anything that looks a little out of place on the boat. So they don't have a search warrant or anything like that. So they can't technically go on the boat or look inside of it, but they can look and peek around. So they're looking around the boat, seeing if anything looks out of place, kind of peeking in through the windows. And when they do, one of them happens to find or see what looks like a bloody handprint on the wall in there. So this is enough for them to get a warrant. And within hours, they swarm the boat with police. Now, the handprint actually turned out not to be a handprint at all. It was just some rust that was in the shape of a handprint. Now, outside of a receipt with some odd purchases on it, they didn't find anything of significance on the boat. So without anything else to really go on, they decide to call Skylar in and just have a conversation with him. They sit him down and they say, hey, take us through every detail of how you came about owning this boat. So Skylar sits down and he's super cooperative. Just, I want to do whatever I can do to help, officer, kind of thing. He tells him how he saw an ad for the Well-Deserved in the Yachting World magazine and he was interested in the boat, so he contacted the seller and they set up a time for a sea trial, and he went out, went on the sea trial, loved the boat, and decided to buy it. So they asked him for details of how the sale went down, and he said, well, I met at the marina. It was myself, my wife, a friend of ours, the notary, and then Tom and Jackie came in afterwards. We all met, signed over the documents for the boat. I handed them a bag full of money. They jumped in their SUV. They took off. We took ownership of the boat. Police ask him, $435,000 cash? That's a lot of money. Where'd you come up with that kind of money? And he explained that, back in the 1990s, I was a child actor and I was on the Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, and I had saved my money and made some good investments along the way. And as he's explaining all this, he just kind of stops himself and he says, I'm lying to you. I didn't earn that money from being a child actor. That's actually stolen money. And remember how I said that he was recently jailed because of an armed robbery? Well, he was robbing a local drug dealer. And what he did was he took the money that he robbed and he stashed it somewhere before he got arrested. And then when he got out of jail, he went back to where the money was. He grabbed the money, and now he has $435,000 cash, or I don't know what he had, but he had at least that to buy the boat. And he's explaining to the police that there's really nothing I can do with this kind of cash, so I was looking to buy something that I could then turn around and sell. The police were blown away that he just admitted that, and they had it on tape. But for whatever reason, they decided, hey, we're not going to arrest you for that. I mean, thank you for telling us the truth. You could have told us anything, could have come up with a story, but you've been helpful and cooperative. We really, really appreciate that. And so, they kind of got a halfway decent story out of him. Some of it may be plausible, but they still weren't convinced. So they call in Jennifer, and they're talking to Jennifer, and she explains exactly what had happened the same way Skylar did. And they call in Skylar's friend who was there to witness everything that's on the paperwork, and he says the same thing. They call in the notary. She says the same exact thing. Everybody's telling the same exact story. All of the paperwork for the sale looked fine. It was all in order. All the I's were dotted, T's were crossed. So at this point, the police were stumped. So they went to the media and they asked for help. They're showing pictures of Tom and Jackie and saying that they're missing. They're showing their SUV and they're saying, hey, if you've seen these people or seen this vehicle, please give us a call. So the news stations all over the area, even those that weren't maybe exactly local, but just on the outskirts, everybody was running the story. And within a couple of days, they actually received a phone call from an elderly couple that was living just over the border in Mexico. And they said, hey, I know that SUV. It's parked right across the street. So the police, in concert with the Mexican police, went over. They find the SUV and they're banging on the door. But nobody's answering the door, but some guy comes walking up. And the guy who's walking up obviously is staying at the house. So they ask him, hey, whose SUV is that? And he's like, oh, it's a friend of mine's. And they're expecting to hear Tom and Jackie Hawks' name thrown. And they're like, is it Tom and Jackie Hawks? And the guy's like, I don't know who Tom and Jackie Hawks is. It's Skylar Deleon's. And the cops knew. They just knew at that moment that Skylar had been lying to him. Skylar told them the last time he saw Tom and Jackie, they took a bag full of money, jumped in their SUV, and rode off into the sunset. If that's the case, how did he get their SUV? They knew there was more to this story now, so when they got back, they pulled Skylar in on that money laundering that he admitted to. Now, this arrest also gave them the ability to search Jennifer and Skylar's house. So while they're going through the house, they're finding all sorts of things that belong to the Hawks. And I'm not talking like little knickknacks. I'm talking laptops, video cameras, things that if somebody was moving, they would never leave this stuff behind. So the police have Skylar locked up. They're asking him, they're saying, hey, look, we've got all this evidence. There's something not lining up with your story. What's going on? But he's not cracking. He's sticking right to the original story. Hey, I don't know what happened. This is some misunderstanding. I gave him a boatload of money. They took off. Jennifer's actually doing the same thing, except she's doing a talk show tour. She's going on TV and talking about how it's a big misunderstanding and that her and Skylar are really concerned about Tom and Jackie and they really want to know where they are too, and they hope that everything's perfectly okay with them. The police aren't buying it, and they're obviously not getting anything out of Skylar, and Jennifer's on her little media tour spewing the same garbage. So they decide, let's call in his buddy and that notary again. And they start with the notary. The notary's name is Kathleen Harris. She's perfectly clean, never done a bad thing in her life, no record whatsoever. And they ask her, once again, just kind of walk us through that sale. And she explains once again the same story. We were at the marina. We all met. Tom and Jackie showed up, blah, 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 signed the papers. They took the money, jumped in the SUV, rode off into the sunset. But the police were tired of hearing that, and they knew there was more to this story. So they start leaning on her, and eventually they lean hard enough, and she cracks, and she's like, hey, I never met Tom and Jackie before in my life. Skylar showed up with these documents. He offered me a bunch of cash if I would actually backdate him and stamp him and so on and so forth. And she just spills the beans on everything. So now the police are on to something. So they bring Skylar's buddy in, Alonso Machain. I don't know if I'm saying that right, but to be honest with you, I don't really care. Guy's a piece of garbage too. So they ask Alonso again. Alonso, in great detail, tell us about the last interaction you had with Tom and Jackie Hawks. So Alonso says, oh, we met at the marina, then Tom and Jackie showed up, and he's going through the same story again, and the police are like, oh, no. Listen, we just had Kathleen Harris in here, the notary, and she cracked and she told us there was no marina meeting. So that's off the table. We know you're lying. Tell us what happens. So Alonso clams up. He doesn't want to say a word. He just keeps quiet. So the police are trying everything. He's not talking. So after a little while of letting him sit there and stew and think about what's going on, they say, hey, listen, we will do everything in our power to make sure you get a reduced sentence for whatever part you played in this mess, but we need to know what happened. You need to tell us everything. And he says, okay, I'll tell you what happened. Now, it turns out he's in his early to mid-20s or something like that, and he was actually one of the jailers, I guess, or corrections officers at the jail when Skylar was in the jail serving time for that armed robbery. Skylar, not long after he gets out, he calls Alonso and he says, hey, I need to talk to you. So Alonso meets with him, and Skylar says, hey, listen, I'm really an international assassin. I'm hired by some pretty big people for a lot of money to kill really, really bad people who really deserve it. And I have this new contract on this couple, Tom and Jackie, that I need some help on. And if you agree to help, I'll pay you $1 million. So Alonso's like, sign me up. I could use $1 million. Skylar, Alonso, and another friend of Skylar's, guy named John F. Kennedy, and definitely not the John F. Kennedy you're thinking about. This guy is a mountain of a human being. He is incredibly intimidating, huge, and just happens to be a longtime gang member. They all show up to meet Tom and Jackie to take the well-deserved out on a sea trial. Now, if you remember, Tom was a retired probation officer, so he's used to dealing with the criminal element, and he senses something's not right here. So he starts stalling. He's trying to delay and trying to push off the sea trial to maybe a different day. So Skylar senses this, according to Alonso, and Skylar steps away to make a quick phone call. And what he does is he actually ends up calling Jennifer, who he knew was just right around the corner with their little baby. So Jennifer shows up, and she's got their little 1-year-old daughter with them, and she's actually pregnant at this point too with their second child. And as soon as she shows up with the baby, Jackie starts going crazy. Oh my gosh, look at the baby. Oh, and she's holding the baby, and her and Jennifer are just having a blast together. Everybody's getting along, and you could actually sense the mood kind of just calm down. And Tom, seeing that everything kind of seemed okay, so he started to let his guard down a little bit too, and he says, you know what, we're already here. Why don't we all just go out on for a sea trial? It'll be fun. So they're all getting on the boat, but as soon as they're getting on the boat, all of a sudden, Jennifer wasn't feeling well, and she was pregnant and the baby and so forth. So she's like, look, the baby, I'm not feeling well. I really need to get her home. I'm going to skip. You guys go out. You guys have a great time, and we'll see you when you get back. Tom now, he's committed. He's pot deep here. He's already committed to going out on the sea trial. So he says, all right, everybody get on board. Let's just go. So they get out, they're sailing, and everybody's kind of walking around the boat looking at things. And Alonso's talking to Jackie, and Skylar and John are talking with Tom, and Tom's out there sailing. And as soon as they get to a point where he really can't see any land or anybody else around him, Skylar and John go up to Tom and they say, hey, we want to ask you about something down in the master cabin. So Tom, Skylar, and John start making their way into the cabin. They get in the kitchen area, and there's actually Alonso and Jackie are talking in there, and they go down this little set of stairs that go into where the master bedroom is. So they go down there and they're talking, and Alonso is talking with Jackie, and all of a sudden, Alonso and Jackie hear this big ruckus going down in the bedroom. Now, Jackie's alarmed, and she looks up like, oh my gosh, what's that? But Alonso knew what that was. That was his cue. So he, at that point, grabs a hold of Jackie, and he throws her onto the floor, and then he pulls her arms behind her back and secures them with some handcuffs that he had brought with him. Now, once Alonso had Jackie secured, Skylar and John came up the stairs. They grabbed her with Alonso. They brought her downstairs and threw her on the bed next to Tom, where they had him with his hands tied behind his back as well.
This is where actually Alonso had to overpower Jackie. Sounds like Jackie's here, Alonso's here, and then that's where Thomas Hawks, Skylar, and Jeff Kerr on the bottom. And Jackie hears the commotion. She looks down this way, and this is where Alonso overpowers her.
Alonso said that Jackie looked up at Skylar as soon as she hit the bed, and she's like, why are you doing this to us? I just met your wife and your baby. I was just holding your baby. We just want to go home. Just let us go home. But Skylar didn't care. He just looked over at Alonso and said, tape their mouths and their eyes shut, and he walked away. So Skylar leaves the bedroom, heads upstairs, and starts steering the boat for open water. While Alonso is taping Tom and Jackie's mouths shut, they were back to back on the bed, and he noticed that Tom was kind of rubbing Jackie's hand and just trying to reassure that everything was going to be okay. Shortly after, the engine shut off, and Skylar called down to Alonso and John and said, hey, bring them up here into the kitchen area. So they get them up to the kitchen area, and this is where Skylar forces them to sign all the sale documents. So they have to sign not only the documents for the sale of the boat, but he also has them sign the power of attorney so Skylar would have access to their bank accounts. So while Jackie's signing the documents, she does a misspelling on the last name on purpose by leaving off the S in Hawks. Now, she did this most likely to alert somebody that, hey, something was wrong. This was not like Jackie. She would never leave the S off in Hawks. And once they got everything signed, they got tied back up. Skylar heads up to the deck and tells John and Alonso, bring them out onto the deck. Once he gets them up onto the deck, he looks over at Alonso and he says, hey, go to the front of the boat, bring me the anchor. Now, Tom and Jackie knew whatever was coming next was going to be bad. So Jackie immediately starts pleading, please let us go. Please let us go. We just want to go home. We want to see our family. We want to see our grandkids. And Tom's fighting. He's doing everything he can do. And he fights hard enough and he breaks a leg free. So with the leg, he turns around and he kicks Skylar. And I mean kicks him hard, really hard. And Skylar goes flying back. But that John Kennedy guy's there. And he just smashes Tom, jumps on him, they resecure him, and that's the end of that. So Skylar gets up. Now they've got Tom and Jackie, and they're secured, and they're back to back. And Alonso's dragging that anchor, and he's struggling with it. It's heavy. So he's struggling with it, and he gets it over all the way over to where Tom and Jackie are. And Skylar walks over, and he grabs the chain, not the side where it's attached to the anchor, but the other side, the loose side. Now, remember, I warned you that this stuff is going to get a little twisted. This is part one of the twisted. Now, Skylar, with the end of the chain in one hand, he takes it and he fastens it to the handcuffs that are attached to Tom and Jackie. Then he bends down and he takes the anchor and he drags it, struggling too, but drags it over to the edge of the boat, heaves it up, and he tosses it over the edge of the boat. It hits the water and it splashes. Now, for I don't know how long, but the next few seconds must have felt like an eternity. but all you could hear is the deafening sound of that chain getting ripped over the side of that boat. Tom and Jackie would have been awake for this. They would have heard this. They would have known what was coming. Now, Alonso said that as that chain was feeding, as soon as it got tight, it pulled and yanked him. And it yanked them so hard that when Tom and Jackie hit the side of the boat, it made, I think it was Jackie's head, made a huge, very loud cracking noise. And both of them were fighting and struggling, doing whatever they could do to prevent that anchor from pulling them over. But the weight was just too much. They didn't have any good leverage. They had their hands tied behind their backs. And slowly, this thing pulled them over. And the whole time this is going on, John, Alonso, and Skylar are just watching them, just sitting there watching this, just watching the torture happening. And eventually it finally did pull them over and they hit the water, 3,500 feet down to the bottom. And Alonso said as soon as they went over, Skylar was cheering. He ran to the side of the boat and he's hooting and hollering and he's watching, and he just stood there with a smile looking out over the water. And as soon as the water settled and there was no more indication that they had ever fallen overboard, he went back to the wheel, started the boat up, turned it around, and headed back for the marina. Now, even though Jennifer wasn't on the boat when the murder took place, she was just as guilty. In fact, this whole thing kind of was her idea in the first place. However, I still have one more thing coming up that you're not going to expect, which is why Skylar did this. Jennifer apparently wanted more money, so that was her motive behind this. But Skylar's is different. Now, as you can imagine, both Skylar and Jennifer were arrested and both pled not guilty. They maintained the whole time that they had nothing to do with this. Now, eventually, Jennifer realized she wasn't getting out of this. So she did cop to it and say, hey, okay, I did do this. However, I only did it because I was afraid, because I thought Skylar was going to hurt me. She got life without parole. JFK, the gang guy, the big guy, not the JFK you're thinking of, but the big one, death penalty. Alonso, the friend, the witness, 20 years. Had he not cooperated, probably would have gotten the death penalty. Now here comes the kicker. Here's number 2, if you will, of the very intense things. In 2008, Skylar went on trial. So while waiting to go on trial, Skylar somehow actually hired a hitman to kill witnesses and got busted for that. So Skylar would end up getting the death penalty, where he would be sentenced to death by lethal injection. So what was the motive, or what was his motive behind the murders? Not long before he murdered the Hawks, Skylar had put down $500 on a gender reassignment surgery to change into a woman. The reason he changed his name from John Julius Jacobson Jr. to Skylar Deleon was because Skylar was more gender neutral and he wanted to be a woman. Now, while he was in prison, he made a case to the prison staff that he wanted gender reassignment surgery so he could become a woman. However, the medical board determined that that wasn't essential or life-threatening, so they denied his request, which makes sense and you would think would be the case anyway. That wasn't good enough for Skylar, so he decided to literally take things into his own hand, and he, let's just say, tied a towel or bed sheet around a certain part of his anatomy, took a razor to remove the problem, if you will. Now, as you can imagine, over the years, I mean, and even in jail you can do it, but Skylar and Jennifer did divorce. I'm sure that comes as a shock to you all. Tom and Jackie still to this day are classified as missing because no bodies were ever found 3,500 feet below the surface. It's an unfortunate way to go, especially for such a loving couple. Now, if you liked what you heard, please give us a like and a subscription, and thank you very much. See you next time on Project Strangeville.